session, we're now out of it, and the next item on the agenda is the minutes from October 17th and October 30th. Is there a motion?
I'd move approval of minutes of October 17th with any necessary corrections.
Is there a second?
Second.
Page 1. Page 2. Page 3. Page 4. Hearing no corrections, all those in favor of adopting the minutes say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. October 30th, is there a motion?
I'd move the approval of the minutes of October 30th with any necessary corrections.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in, well, actually, I'm sorry. Can't, no, jumping the gun. Okay, page 1. And page 2. All those in favor of accepting the October 30th, 2023 minutes, say aye.
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 Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Next is public comment. This is a part in the meeting where anybody can make a comment to the board. It can be about what is on the agenda. It might be wise to wait until that agenda item is up, but there's no limits to it. So with that being said, does anybody in the room have a public comment to make? Eric, is there anybody online?
Nope, no one online.
Okay, great. Next, we have an interview for the CCRPC alternative. Michael, is that? Yep. Come on over, come on up, come on down. Welcome. Generally what we do is we ask somebody, we have your submitted application, but ask people to kind of give a thumbnail sketch of themselves and why they're interested in the position. So if you could do that.
Sure. I moved to Williston October 1, so I'm relatively new to Williston. I've been in Montpelier for about 4 years. Prior to that, I lived in Durango, Colorado. I went to Vermont Law School, graduated 2010, moved to the Western States, did a number of different things, and then came back. I currently work for the Town of Stowe Electric Department, where I run the Legal and Regulatory Affairs Program, which is just me. So I manage the renewable energy standard for the town, which is, for me, it's predominantly Tier 2, Tier 3. Tier 3 is the rebate electrification program. So I work closely with Lamoille County Planning Commission, a bunch of stakeholders, Efficiency Vermont, so on and so forth. And then I obviously have a handle on what Vermont's trying to do in terms of decarbonization, electrification, renewable energy. My time at Stowe, I've brought in over $2 million in grant funding for the utility, which means the ratepayers don't have to pay that. And on Monday, I'll submit an application for an additional $6.6 million in a loan program through USDA, which is the first of its kind for municipals to participate in. And if I do it correctly, we'll get a 20% loan forgiveness on that number. And what we'll be doing with that is we'll be installing renewable energy projects and distribution system upgrades, which includes some automation to help us shift load during outages, grid resiliency, hardening. And what we're most proud of is a low income on-bill generation credit program utilizing a new hydroelectric facility that we'll install at our headquarters in Moscow. When I was in Montpelier, I served on the DRB and the Conservation Commission. So I have a strong background in all these issues. I manage the EV charging program for Stowe, which includes 2 fast chargers that are at the Alchemist. One doesn't work. The other one kind of works. And then, of course, we have large issues like bail, transportation, traffic, so on and so forth. So for a small town, we're deeply immersed in all these issues. I also serve on the Jericho Underhill Land Trust Board, so I'm familiar with Jericho, Underhill, and now I'm getting to know Williston. I'll stop there.
Great, thank you. Questions from the board?
Did you come for another one and then?
I did. Yeah, the other guy was a little more, I don't have like 7 years or generations of Vermont ties, so yeah.
How did you find the, tell me a little bit about your service on the DRB and Conservation Committee, and did you enjoy, which part of that did you like doing?
Well, I don't know if I liked any of it, but no, I like I said before, I enjoy working at the local level. You know, obviously being a town employee and being a municipal utility, you know, I'm well versed in all the politics and neighborhood disputes. So I took sort of a perverse joy in it all, right? The landowner that wants the neighbor to remove the fence on their property, even though they don't have property rights, et cetera, et cetera. But no, I think what you learn is just to be smart. I can talk to a wall in my sleep, but I try to be, you know, respectful of people's time and just speak when I have something to add. And then the Conservation Commission, you know, is a good experience. It's tough with a volunteer board. It was hard to get projects going, hard to get engagement. But we did, if you're familiar with Montpelier, I was able to seek some funding for a rain garden, which is at VSECU as you come in. And so that got flooded over on the July floods. But it's those types of things that we try to bring, like those innovative programs like rain gardens to the area, so.
Have you had a chance to review kind of the pending projects and the scope of the projects that the CCRPC is considering for not only our region, but also for Williston specifically?
You know, I've taken a quick look at the plan, and then the Williston town plan is obviously for revision. You know, I'm not going to pretend like I read it all, but I'm well versed with Lamoille County, their plan. I've been working with the town of Stowe on their plan revision. I also worked on the emergency management plan for the town of Stowe. So, you know, I'm generally well versed with the issues. Obviously, Chittenden County is a different county than Lamoille and Washington. You have much bigger issues, broader base, more funding opportunities. But again, Stowe and Montpelier, for small communities, they face a lot of these same issues, just at a smaller scale.
Thank you for all of your public service. What do you see as the most difficult issue in the town of Williston as for the CCRC?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always going to be transportation, smart growth, and moving people in and out of the town in a smart way. You know, what I see here is that Williston is well sited, right? You're in between South Burlington, Jericho, Underhill. And to me, it seems like a bit of a pass-through community, just the month that I've been here. You know, I think it would be great to find ways to keep people to come to Williston. Williston's the destination, not the pass-through. And I think you can do that with a variety of things like pocket parks or linking the trail systems together. It does seem like you have a lot of sidewalks in your residential areas, which is great. I think it would be interesting to see if you can link them together. So get the locals moving on bikes or on foot, and then allow folks to come in and park. You know, I'm sure you face the same parking issues as Stowe. And what Stowe struggles with is how to move people in and out and how to actually serve the locals. I think what gets lost a lot of times is we don't serve the actual people that live here. You know, we're concerned, especially in Vermont, about bringing folks into Vermont, spend money, drive the economy. I get it. But I do want to see us serve our neighbors and our residents more.
Great answer. Thanks.
Yeah.
Other questions? Okay. I have no questions. Thank you for coming in. We generally make these decisions later on in the meeting, give board members a chance to ruminate
Sure.
on it. So we will take it up later, but thank you very much for coming in. Thank you for
Okay,
your interest.
thank you.
Thank you.
Next on the agenda, police services report. We're going to be receiving a transmittal and overview of a report from consultant. Our consultant is coming forward now. Jim, if you could introduce yourself to people, including there are probably people in the viewing audience, and take it away.
Certainly. Good evening. And first, I want to say, before I even introduce myself, I appreciate the opportunity to do this project for the town of Williston. It was a privilege to work on the future of your public safety here in Williston. So my name is Jim Baker. I own and operate a small consulting firm, JW Leadership Consulting, based out of Arlington, Vermont. I've been in the state since 1978. Now, I won't bore you because my bio is in the report, but for the folks that are home watching, I spent 31 years with the state police, retired in 2009 as the colonel. I went on to several agencies that were in what I would describe as crisis. The first one was the Vermont Police Academy, where I served as the executive director for about 1.5 years. And then I was the police chief in Rutland for about 3 years. And then I went to Washington, D.C., where I was on the executive staff of the International Associations of Chiefs of Police. And my latest stint was the interim commissioner of corrections here in Vermont. That was supposed to be 120 days, and then this thing, COVID hit, and I was there 23 months. And that cured me of ever running another agency again. And I continue to consult both for myself in private practice, but I also work with the International Association of Chiefs of Police and a few other organizations nationally on various projects.
If I may, before we get started, Chief Foley's joining us over Zoom. He's at the New England Police Chiefs Conference today, so he's connected on.
Great. Okay. Okay. So, Jim, you have a presentation for us?
I do. If I think Eric is at the control panel here. If it works.
Yeah, success.
So the engagement with you through your town manager was to take a look at the police department and take a look at the growth of the community versus the growth of the police department. In essence, that's what the ask was. The focus ended up being on the staffing structure and scope of the police department. And it was accomplished, the work that we did. I have a few associates that worked with me on this project. The work that we did focused on qualitative and quantitative data analysis. And we did that through interviews, data review from the police department, data review from your planning director, Matt Belanger, who I must say made my life very easy. The planning that you do here is pretty impressive. Not that I'm a planner, but it made my life fairly less complicated in getting information that I thought I needed to understand the growth of Williston and be able to look at the police department against that growth that has taken place. We conducted focus groups. And as I said, the planning information, the data and the reports, including reports such as the work that was done on Taft Corners, was very helpful in the work that we did. I conducted ride-alongs inside the police department, interviewed the leadership of the police department, including the sergeants, and direct observation while I was here, and just riding around town and observing what goes on. And finally, there was literature review that I did based upon the direction that the assessment started taking. The approach, again, was to understand how the growth of the police department has been compared to the growth of the town. From the beginning, I kept hearing about these two assessments that were done that no one could put their hands on. And I was able, through former town manager Rick McGuire, who I just happened to bang into at the Vermont Leagues of Cities and Town Fair, gather some information about those studies. The information, I've never seen the studies, but the information was contained in a study that I believe was done in 2002, taking a look at the building of a new police station. So I was able to gather some information from that. And Eric, you can go to the next slide. So again, right up front, talk a little bit about these previous studies. 1989, T. Mark Associates recommended that the department consists of 15 sworn officers by 1995. In 1996, the Vermont Leagues of Cities and Towns, I'm assuming they had a subject matter expert come in to do an assessment. I don't have that information, and I certainly don't understand the reasoning behind what these recommendations were. But at the time, they recommended 41 sworn members by 2016, and also recommended a structure that I'll get to later in the presentation to support those 41 sworn members. And then, by 2023, you were at 17 sworn staffing members or sworn staff inside the police department with the same structure you've been had in place supporting the operation of the police department for a number of years. And you'll notice in the report that I made recommendations on how to utilize the report. And I would urge you to be looking at the report as a planning document. Obviously, the recommendations I made about the staffing, there's no expectation that you're going to be able to fill that staffing immediately, either from a recruiting standpoint, because of the nature of recruiting right now, nor from a financial standpoint. But I would not want to leave here tonight and not say to you that 2 prior studies were never followed. And I think it leaves you in a pretty curious situation right now with staffing inside the department. Some key findings. Now, next slide, Eric, please. I've shortened these up. The findings are in the report, but these are ones that I want to emphasize to you. You have a safe community. The crime data shows that. It's a safe community, and I don't need to tell you that your growth has been significant. I kidded, the first trip I took here to meet Eric and the chief, I hadn't been probably as far as Starbucks when I was the Commissioner of Corrections. I think I stopped there a couple times on my way to St. Albans to get a coffee, never turned the corner. And when I turned the corner, I didn't know where I was. I had no idea that growth had taken place in Williston. I'm in the southern part of the state. I don't get up here that often. I don't need to tell you that your growth has been significant, and that's a good thing. It's a good thing for the community. It's a good thing for Chittenden County. And there's a shift. I know from interviewing folks, including developers in town, that there's a shift of where you're going with your development to include housing, mixed-use housing, housing that's more condensed, potentially going up and not out. It presents different challenges for a police department to provide safety to that type of community versus the community that they provided safety to for the last 20 years or so. Spread out, larger residential neighborhoods that you drive through and patrol. This is going to bring on different challenges for the police department from the standpoint of being able to provide safety. One of the things that I was kind of taken back with, and I shared with Eric and the chair when we met the other day, in all the planning documents I read, and I read quite a few, no mention at all about police department or the growth of the police department. And that's why one of my recommendations is that in the future, there should be more conversation as this growth goes on about what the police department can handle and what they can manage when it comes to providing safety to the community. To a person that I worked with inside the police department, some of them are here tonight, to a person, they are professional, respectful, polite, and hardworking folks, to a person. They were very cooperative. The ultimate finding, I think, is that the police department has not grown, nor is the structure structured, nor is their scope designed to meet where Williston is in 2023. Nor will it be designed, scoped, and staffed to meet what the challenges will be moving forward. and I'll talk a little bit about data. The turnover in leadership in the police department, put aside the fact that Chief Foley's been here, I think, for 5 years, 6. Prior to that, you had a lot of turnover in leadership of the police department. Now, I don't know this, but I would guess those reports that were generated in 89 and 96 may not have gotten a lot of life, gotten legs, because of the turnover in the leadership of the department. I don't know that. You've also had turnover in staffing inside the department. And I bring that up now because it puts you in the position of not having the structure inside the police department to have a succession plan. You have 2 sergeants that are due to retire in the next 24 months. You know, the chief, I've known the chief for a long time. I know he's watching. He can't throw something at me, but I'll say it anyway. The chief is my age. We've been around a long time. You know, you don't know when he's going to decide it's time to move on. And so that turnover in staffing's put you in a position not to have a succession plan. And when I get to the recommended structure that I'm recommending to you, there's a reason why, and I'll explain that when I get there, about why that's structured the way it is. Not to put yourself in a position where what the chief does every day is trying to fill vacancies. It gives you a chance to have a little bit longer retention of staff by having opportunities inside the department, and then start develop what it looks like 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years down the road, what the leadership of the department's going to look like. Another finding, the majority of your calls are non-criminal. I mean, you saw the chart that's in the report. I like to use bar charts because it really stands out. The majority of your calls are non-criminal. With that said, there is an issue in the department with the quality of data. And it's not, again, I say this in the report, and I want to say this here. When you ask somebody to do an assessment of an organization, obviously you're looking for things to improve, and it can come off as being real negative. And this is one of these things. The quality of the data, a lot of calls are getting generalized. And what I mean by that is things like citizens assist, suspicious activity. And there's not enough detail broken down without going into the reports to figure out what the activity is. And I'll talk a little bit more about this in a few minutes. But that lack of being able to tell exactly what's going on in town doesn't allow for proactive, pro-production of safety with the community. So data is a point that I'll come back to. For the most part, when I did the focus groups, there is a desire in the community for more interaction with the police department. Everyone talks about it. The police department responds quickly. They're polite. They're professional. They get to a situation in a hurry. But there is a desire to do more interaction with the police department outside of when they're called for a service. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. You've been very supportive in this community. I know this from being the Commissioner of Corrections, of your restorative justice practices. And you make a commitment in this community to restorative justice practices by having the executive director as an employee, housing them, providing in-kind services to them to support the restorative methods that CJCs are known for. There could be a better strategy between the police department and the CJCs. And that's where the recommendation that comes later about co-locating the CJCs with elements of the police department closer to where the activity is that requires intervention by the CJCs. I would be less than honest not to say you have an emerging crime problem in your community. And it revolves around larcenies, shoplifting, and those type of nature of crimes that you see across the state. I mean, I'm currently working in other communities in the state. I just want to be clear, what you're facing is not unusual for what's being seen in other communities. But it still will rip away at the social fiber of the community. No one wants to go to Walmart and have to deal with someone that's confrontational as they're leaving the store, stealing property, or going into Home Depot, or going into Marshall's, or going into any of the other locations. That's an emerging issue that needs to be dealt with. And the final finding I just want to mention right now is just that the police department is not sized, staff structured, or scope to be able to deal with some of these emerging issues. And I want to pay particular attention in a minute to the calls that the fire department are doing around overdoses and overdoses of substances to include alcohol, which is an important indicator of some of that social chaos that I'm referring to. So Eric, if you can move on. This chart shows the data from the police department. My copy, I think it's probably my age with my glasses, but the blue is, I believe, agency assist. The next one down, the orangish color, is directed patrols. The silver is suspicious activity. The yellow is alarms, and the last one, the off-color blue, is assist the public. This accounts for a good chunk of what the calls for service inside the police department are. And when I talk about generalizing, it's hard to tell when I look at agency assist, what does that mean? What did that involve? Assist to the public. Suspicious activity, what's that mean? It's generalization. It happens a lot in police departments. Here, I think from interviewing staff and taking a look at the data, it's because you don't have the staff to do the work that you should do around data. And I'm a big fan, and you probably can tell from reading the report, I'm a big fan of data-driven models to impact quality of life and safety issues in communities.
Can I stop your flow for just a second?
Sure.
So
Sure.
agency assist, I assume that's if they go with the fire department or if they go to.
Could be, that's my very point, ma'am. Could be they went to the fire department, could be another police department asked for help. It could be that a security company asked for help. So not to be able to break that down to a geo level makes it very difficult to understand what's going on.
About directed patrol, what's that mean?
Directed patrols is a pretty standard practice in law enforcement. Mrs. Jones is complaining about speeding in her neighborhood, and they go out and they do a directed patrol to address that. But I'm glad you asked that, because that's an example of not having a good understanding of data. And I understand why agencies do directed patrols, but just to go out and take a shot at when that activity is going on is not very efficient. Versus if you had data that showed a trend, a time, a day, you could better utilize your resources to impact the activity that the citizen is complaining about. That makes sense to you. Any other questions on that? I know I go rather quick. I want to be respectful of your time. Yes, sir.
The assist public, is that, what is that?
Look, it could be somebody comes in and they've got a question about registration on their car. It could be that somebody's cars broke down on the side of the road. It could be a whole host of things that an officer takes a case number for. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir, thank you. So,
One of the other things about, and again, I'm not saying this is happening here, but my experience when I see data like this is there is a culture and mentality in law enforcement that they think, and I'm not saying it's happening here, but it's the impression that I'm getting, that it's ingrained that you take a case number for whatever you do because it's a time management thought process. The record management system you have is not a time management record system. It's not meant to keep track of how much time an officer is spending on a given task inside the department. And I've done assessments before where chiefs will come into select boards and say, our calls for service went up by 25% last year, hence I need more police officers. And without drilling into that information and figuring out, as I've said, what the data is telling you, I am not a big fan of that approach because I don't think it's effective and I don't think it's efficient. One of the suggestions is, as you see a recommendation, is about cleaning up the data. and providing resources to be able to do that inside the department. Any other questions on that slide? Eric, if you can go to the next slide. This is just, again, to demonstrate the graph of criminal calls versus non-criminal calls. And you can see, when you see that amount of non-criminal activity, I could not, officers that I spoke to, that I interviewed, could anecdotally tell me that this is what's going on. But the data does not reflect that, nor can you make decisions about resource application without better understanding and just looking at a chart like this. What's contained in that blue and what kind of activity? Why does it become important? Because a lot of that activity inside that non-criminal work is stuff where you can intervene ahead of time to prevent crimes from happening. Suspicious activity in a neighborhood. You get a license plate. You talk to Burlington PD and you find out it's a serial burglar, right? You're preventing something from happening in your community. And that's why the data is important.
The shoplifting calls at Walmart, which I thought was gonna be half the calls, is that criminal or non-criminal?
It's criminal, but you also, look, I think, the town manager and I have talked a little bit about helping out around the merger of the CJC with an outreach unit. And I'll say this, and I know it's corporate policy, but your retailers are not being good neighbors when they're not reporting crime to the police department. They are not good neighbors when they do that. Because they're allowing a situation, they're part of the problem and they need to be part of the solution. When I hear from the officers that some of the retailers are not even calling when there's a shoplifting and it's their corporate policy, well, and I'm not saying all Home Depot here, but they can absorb $500,000 a year. You as a community can't absorb that type of social chaos. And they're not being good neighbors by not calling the police to report crime. You're telling people in neighborhoods, if you see suspicious activity, call the police, but you've got retailers that won't call when a crime occurs. It's not being good neighbors. And I think it's something that needs to be worked on.
You believe that's not a frustration?
I don't know, because I want to give folks the benefit of the doubt. If I understand it from talking to the officers and from talking to the chief, it's corporate policies that's being developed across those corporate organizations that they're just willing to write off a certain amount of loss in a given year. And okay, so they take the loss. But I'll remind you, every time somebody doesn't pay for something, you're also losing a chunk of money as well. And never mind the social chaos that comes along with that. That affects the quality of life in Williston. So I'll say it again, and I know I'm being repetitive, but those folks are not being good neighbors by not reporting crime. Eric, the next slide, please. One of the things that I was trying to figure out is, what is the impact on the police department as a result of the challenges everyone in the state is facing around substance use disorder, calls for mental health, and so on. And I couldn't discern that from the data. So I was able to get this data from the fire department. And again, I threw 23 in there up until I believe it was August when I got this data from the fire department. So the blue is overdoses to include alcohol, not just the legal substances, but alcohol as well. And then mental health calls are the orange. The gray is when the police department was on any scene at all with the fire department. The fire chief could have broke this down, but I told him, I didn't want him to put that amount of work into it. So the gray is any time that the police department is on the scene with the fire department, but it's hard to discern. Are they overdose calls, mental health calls? And those are the reality of where law enforcement is in the 21st century in 2023 in Vermont, where the bulk of the work is centering around these social issues that intervening the criminal justice system is having little to no effective impact on that. So it's hard to pull that data out. The reason why I put that slide in the package is, again, to emphasize that the quality of data matters. I often say to folks that, I'm a football fan. I won't tell you who my team is because they're 2-6 right now. Monday Night Football doesn't have a game and not keep score. And if you don't keep score, it's only practice. And I think data becomes a very important piece of how police departments are going to have to function moving forward in Vermont in the future. So the next slide. Any questions on this? Again, I condensed these recommendations in the slide, but you have them in the report. I'm recommending that the town manager start working on a 5-year plan to increase the size of the Williston Police Department to 11 more sworn members, 2 non-sworn support staff, and to take a look at expanding or doing something different around the social worker relationship. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. The second piece is to open up a criminal investigative unit, open up a community outreach unit. I think both of those are a priority, but if you were to ask me the question, I know the chief is working diligently to get back to the 17 authorized now. When you get to that number, or when the chief feels comfortable, I think the first thing that needs to happen is get a criminal investigator in place inside the department. Much of the shoplifting and the social disorder, I believe from interviewing staff and talking to other people in Chittenden County, these are interjurisdictional crimes that are occurring that requires a level of coordination and investigations that does not exist now. So it's just a free-for-all. And it shouldn't surprise anybody that your shoplifting calls are going up because it's a free-for-all. And I'm recommending those two. I'm also recommending that the Williston Criminal Justice Center be co-located with the community outreach team, and that be moved closer to Taft's, Maple Tree, somewhere down there, closer to where the action is at. The other recommendation is to leverage more restorative practices between the police department and the CJC. Stand up a committee inside the department. I know from talking to the chief the other day that he recently sent staff to training, and they've started doing this already. Stand up a committee internally on looking at hiring and retention. There's no sense in me sitting here and talking about 11 more positions over 5 years when you've struggled to fill the 17 you've had. Now, I will caution you, as folks that make decisions, not to use that as a pass on acting, on moving towards upping the staffing inside the police department. In some of my prior lives, I've been in front of governing bodies where they said, since you can't fill the positions anyway, we're going to cut them from the budget to save money. I caution you not to move in that direction, because you're operating from a 1996 study that never got any traction, and you're finding yourself in this position now. That's going to put you, a couple more folks leave the department, and it's going to be very difficult to get to my recommendations. So the message that I would say that you would want to send to some of the folks that are here in the room and the ability to recruit is that the Williston Police Department is on the move. And if you want to come work somewhere that's moving forward, you want to come work in Williston. And you have a lot of say in that when it comes to messaging that message out. We're cross-section community. You'll see in my report where I name some of this, and I talk a little bit about co-production of safety in the community. Community policing is one thing. When I talk about co-production, it's a much deeper relationship with the community, a much more involved conversation every day with the community about building relationships that raise the quality of life, lower harm to the community, and provide safety in the community. It's deeper than having, and I'm not criticizing this, I know it happens here once in a while. I'm not talking about coffee with the cop. I'm talking about a prolonged, lasting relationship with neighborhoods, businesses, developers, on talking about how do we work together to make Williston the safest place it can be. You are a safe community, but you're starting to see some of the creep from what some of the other challenges of other communities have. I'm also recommending a system of accountability, and I'm not for 1 minute insinuating or saying that there's not accountability in the police department. It's not what I'm saying. But I'm a fan of models of policing, working with co-production and safety, where you assign geographic areas of town to leadership inside the police department, and they own that real estate. It is their job to work with folks within that area to resolve issues, prevent crime, and make sure information is flowing from the police department to the community. So in the recommendations, you have 4 sergeants that are in patrol. I'm recommending that those 4 sergeants own a quarter of the town. Not that that's the only place where they work. And I'm sure sergeants are probably saying right now, how in the world am I supposed to do that because we're shorthanded? That's the point of what I'm going to talk about in a minute, about structuring the department to support that type of work in your community. Next is focus on data, the quality and the analysis of data. You know, I can talk to an officer, I can talk to the chief. They can tell me what they think is going on, and they're probably fairly accurate, but they can't dive into the data to give a real assessment of how you're going to use your resources more effectively to deal with pressing issues that you have. And then the last piece on the data is create a dashboard that is seen by everybody. I know this sounds like it's a minor thing, and why would it be a recommendation? My experience in this business is that not only is data important, but when everybody can see the data, and I'll use the football analogy again, everybody understands what the play is when it's called, because they've seen the play and they've practiced the play. And data does the same thing when it comes to figuring out how to use your assets inside your police department. Eric, the next slide. So this is your current structure right now that I replicated from just where you are now. You have the chief. I mean, you currently have a lieutenant's position that is open. There's an administrative assistant that sits there off that stem coming down from the chief, who I think is here in the room tonight. I think I saw Ashley here. I want to call Ashley out. Towards the end, I was calling Ashley every other day in a crisis, looking for something, and within hours, she had the information for me. Ashley's asked to do a lot. I'm not making this into Ashley, I'm making it into the position. And this is part of the reason why the quality of the data is not where it should be, because there's nobody focused on that. She does things like discovery for the court and entering traffic tickets and meeting people at the door and taking care of other business inside the police department. And that there is not the focus on data that it should be. If you go down is your emergency communication staff, which is now housed at Essex. I will circle back to that in a minute. And then below that is the 4 sergeants and the 4 platoons that you have. And so some of the platoons have, I think the way it works out is to get to 17, I think one of the platoons do not have the same amount of staff authorized to them on the shift. That's what the structure looks like right now. So when I talk about the inability to meet the scope of what should be going on, data is one, community outreach is another, and you can see from looking at the structure why that's challenging. Eric, if you can go to the next slide, please. This was actually the table of organization that I found in the 2002 report, recommendations on building a new police station. And this is from the 1996 Vermont Leagues of Cities and Towns proposal, where they proposed 41 sworn officers. I don't know what the reasoning was or the rationale or what the analysis was, but in 1996, that number sounds awful high to me. In 2023, the number sounds awful high to me. So I don't know how they got to that, but notice the structure of the department. They did recommend 2 lieutenants. In fact, I believe in the writings, they recommended an assistant chief along with 2 lieutenants. And if you, one thing on the side to the left, where you've got, you know, people in the patrol division, for lack of a better description, that's understandable. They recommended corporals. I'll come back to that in a minute. But if you go on to the other side, that structure may have worked then. And again, I don't know what the reasoning is, but that structure on the right cannot support what needs to be done in Williston, in my opinion. So that's what the recommendation was in 1996. And the recommendation was that that's what the department would look like in 2016. Eric, the next slide. This is what I'm recommending for a structure. This is where the 11 positions are added to bring you to 28 sworn members, not 41. If you look, the chief coming down with an administrative assistant to support the leadership of the department. On the left-hand side is that lieutenant that I'm referring to as the patrol commander, who would oversee the patrol functions of the department with the 4 platoons underneath it. And each platoon would have a sergeant, a corporal, and I'll come back to this in a second, and 3 officers. That would make up a platoon in a shift. So you would have 5 officers, and, you know, again, on any given day, you're not gonna have 5 officers. Training, sick leave, annual leave, you know, workman's comp, all the kind of things that you deal with inside a department. But that would be the structure and the recommendation of the structure of the platoons that I would recommend. If you move over to the right-hand side of the chart, there's a lieutenant there that I'm referring to as support services and community outreach. And if you look underneath that, the recommendation is that support services be supported by, or support services would support emergency communication. I didn't delve deeply into emergency communications. I did meet with some of the staff at Essex, talk to them a little bit. The only thing I'm going to say about emergency communication is that at some point, there's going to be a decision point about what you need to do about emergency communication. I know from talking to the town manager, he sits on the regional authority looking at emergency services. I'm not optimistic from the people I talk to and even talking to the town manager that you're going to resolve emergency communication. And this is a discussion that I didn't take up in this report because it's serving you okay right now. But you're going to need to be thinking about this as time goes on, about how you're going to resolve that. Because the growth of the department to this size probably may not be able to be supported by 3 folks working out of Essex PD. Also under there is opening of that criminal investigative unit that I talked about. Ultimately with a sergeant supervising it with 2 detectives as growth goes on. Not something that needs to happen right now, but I believe with the growth that you're seeing that you're eventually going to need that type of criminal investigative support in the community. As you move across there, just excuse me for 1 minute because I can't read mine. The data clerk and data analyst would also fall under the support services lieutenant, where that work that we talked about earlier would be done around cleaning up data, better quality of data, and analysis of data, and deployment of resources based on that data. And then the final piece, moving across, is that piece about reaching out to a community outreach unit with a sworn officer there and a non-sworn community service specialist that many communities are operating with, that I think could have a real impact on helping divert people out of the system, but hold them accountable for the behavior that's going on right now, especially around the shoplifting piece. And the CJC would also be co-located with them. So that's what I'm recommending over the next 5 years.
On that right-hand
Yes.
right-hand side, which are sworn officers? I assume the 3 under the criminal investigation unit?
Correct.
And the outreach officer?
And the outreach officer, yes. I also think that Let me talk a little bit about succession planning, retention of officers. That structure, especially with the creation of the corporals, is starting to get you to a point where you're starting to build succession into your organization, where people want to come and they want to stay. And the union folks probably, I don't know if anybody's behind me representing the union or not, so I'm running the risk of getting something thrown at me. I'm not always convinced money is the answer to why people jump around. If you take a look at the research that's being done around, and I mentioned this in the report, the targeted population that you should be recruiting right now has a whole different look on what they want out of quality of life in their workplace. And they want to feel like they're part of something bigger than them. They're part of a team that's making a difference. And when I started thinking about the structure, I'm thinking about that, where you're creating opportunities for people in the department to do something besides go to Home Depot every day and process somebody for shoplifting. You're creating other opportunities for them, creating opportunities for them to learn, creating 2 lieutenant's positions that eventually can be trained to become the next police chief. That's part of the reason why I envision the structure looking like that. So I'm gonna stop there and open it up to questions.
Questions?
So I read that you, I read a comment in here that said we shouldn't use police calls as a way to decide the size, and you shouldn't necessarily just pick your neighboring town and pick that. So you kind of give a lot of ways how not to choose how big your organization should be. So how'd you come up with this number?
I started with the structure that I think you're gonna need. I started with the structure that I think you're gonna need over the next 5 years, facing the challenges you're facing, and then filled the staff in to meet that structure, if that makes sense to you. In order to define the scope of what the work will be. Some of that scope's already here. You see that in the fire department data, and you see it in the shoplifting data. But I started with the structure, looking back at those other 2 reports, because your record management system doesn't allow you to do time management studies. Number 1. Number 2, I'm not a fan of those, and I'll just be blunt. People game those time management systems, right? When you know, I've seen it many, many times doing staffing assessments. They will game how much time they spend on something. And I think it's not a good measurement. Why isn't it a good measurement to like compare yourself to South Burlington, for example? Is because I'm sure Chief Burke is collecting data much different than your data being collected. So to try to compare apples to apples when you're not collecting the data the same way makes it almost impossible to make that comparison.
Well, I get your whole data thing, and I'm a numbers person, so I wish there was more data too. When you talk about having quadrants of the town, it would only really make sense to me if we weren't doing it geographically. We weren't doing it maybe by population, but by need, right?
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
can't do that without, I didn't see anything here about the geographic spread of all these calls.
Mhm.
So,
Well,
we
it's
can't
hard to do that when you don't have the data.
Go back to data, exactly.
Correct, correct.
What do you think about the Essex Junction Police Department and their Citizens Police Academy that they've been doing to generate more interest in the police department, let the public see what the police are doing?
You know, I think that's an example of when I talk about co-production of safety, a much deeper understanding of what, and ironically, I just happened to have a conversation with Chief Hogue a couple weeks ago about that. It's a deeper understanding of how the police department operates. So for me, it would be an example of co-production of safety.
Do you think, from what I've heard, talking to different people, one part of the morale problem is the catch and release of the shoplifters? Do you see that as a problem?
Absolutely. That's why I'm recommending to you that there's a shared consciousness and understanding. I think those are the words I used in the report about how the CJC interacts with the police department, because in many ways right now, there is zero accountability for the folks that are committing those crimes. There is nothing for them to fear as a result of them going in and committing crimes. You don't even have merchants who the victims are calling the police. The system from COVID is overloaded. I mean, the courts are backlogged. And so cases sit 3, 4, 5 months before there's any type of action at all. And most of the studies that I've read around accountability for misbehavior and social disorder in communities, the quicker the consequences come to the behavior, the more effective it is to control that activity. And it doesn't necessarily mean people need to go to jail. It means there needs to be some consequence for the behavior that's damaging the community.
I've heard that there's a local merchant that has actually hired a Chittenden County Sheriff's Department
I don't know.
to patrol their stores.
Yeah, I don't know that, sir.
And that might possibly be becoming something more common, like we've seen in Burlington, of some of the crime-ridden areas where people are hiring protection. I thank you for this report. I think public safety is a very important factor in this town. I think, people in this town want to feel safe. I thank you for doing this
Thank you.
report. It's a
Thank you
very
for the
well-done
feedback. I
report.
appreciate that. Thank you.
And I really appreciate that the broad look at, this, the police department as more than just the sworn officers. That was one of the things I was really hoping to see was, that policing isn't just, the officers, that it does involve, social work and our CJC and we're really lucky in this town that we already have a system in place, but, certainly, there's room for expansion as your report suggests, too. One of the things obviously we all know in this room is that staffing statewide, nationally is an issue. And so, and I appreciate you, saying that we need to not be responsive to the lack of available, personnel right now, in considering future staffing needs. But any insight, I know this is maybe beyond the scope of your report and your analysis, about how kind of, best to, make these gains, in staffing and to, to fill the vacancies, but to potentially fill, future positions too.
Yeah, I really, well, first of all, some of my other experiences are, I'm starting to see some light at the end of the tunnel for organizations, going back to my old organization at corrections, vacancy rates were, when I left them was up around 40%. They're down, I think the last time I heard 16, 17%. There is some success. I know some other organizations are having some success at recruiting, but what I would say to you is Williston Police Department has to offer something that no one else is offering. It's that competitive. And I think that from my conversations throughout this assessment, that moving in the direction of being co-production of safety, I don't want to overuse that word, embracing the restorative practices, creating an outreach unit, creating an opportunity in the department for advancement is going to put you in a better position than a lot of other agencies are. You may be able to, I know this, this is distasteful, but it's the way it works. You may be able to get more pre-certified officers to come if they see the opportunity to move around in the department and do stuff that may be a little bit different than, the day I did the ride-along, it was 4 hours in the car. And I mean, we just went from one side of the road to the other, from Home Depot across the street to Dick's, back across the street, just chasing shoplifting for 4 hours. That is not going to create a situation where someone's going to want to come work here. I wouldn't want to do it. And even in my youngest days, I wouldn't want to do it. So I think you've got to create a situation where you've got something that no one else has got. And I think creating a vision around a real aggressive outreach to the community is going to help you bring people here and create opportunities to, more importantly, retain people here and not lose them. You know, every time I talk to the chief through this process, you know, when I first came, 6 months ago, 7 months ago, you were fully staffed at 17. Within a month, you were down to 15, 14, and it's been up and down. And I think figuring out a way to retain people is gonna be really important.
Okay. Kind of along those lines, I was intrigued with the whole outreach concept, but really it comes down to it's staffed with 2 people in your proposal. Did you self-limit that for some of the reason, or am I missing that this is gonna be, yeah, there's 2 people on this chart, but it'll also be the 4 from the quadrant, or?
Yeah.
It seems like we have a lot of needs in a very compact, busy part of town, that 2 people is not gonna be able to make a dent.
Yeah, so I appreciate that question, right? Some of that was just like shock value, right? Right, I didn't want to shock Eric with the number of people. But on the other hand, I believe by co-locating people and making that kind of investment, you're gonna see other organizations that want to come and be co-located. And it's force multiplying public safety and public health, because the issues you're really talking about are more public health than they are public safety. And I think by creating that space, you're creating opportunities for other organizations to come in, co-locate, force multiply, and focus on where public safety and public health are meeting, and getting people diverted off to those services that, you know, the CJC's been working with for a while out of necessity. I think you're gonna see the opportunity for other folks to come in. I'm a big fan of General McChrystal's book, The Team of Teams. And I think you're gonna see the opportunity for other folks to potentially want to be part of something that is only happening in a couple other areas in the state.
So on the community outreach recommendation, just sort of in the way it would actually work, if we had a community outreach location in the Taft's Corners area that also had CJC, that's the idea, right? To have CJC people there as well.
Correct.
So, you know, if somebody is detained for shoplifting at Dick's, and, you know, the officer recognizes the person as somebody who has a significant, not criminal history, but also significant drug issues and perhaps some mental health issues, that person would be taken over to the police outpost.
Yeah. But let me make a couple points. Like, you don't even know, because of the way data is collected, you don't even know how many people you're encountering are addicted. It's just anecdotal stories inside the department.
Yeah.
Well, it's you know, Susie from such and such a town comes here all the time and she's heavily addicted. That's another point on the data that I really think needs to be added to the data to figure out what the public health impact needs to be able to move the needle on this behavior. Back to your original question. The way I would envision this going is that, well, let me talk about what happens now. I think this is what happens. Sometimes somebody gets picked up for shoplifting. Sometimes, depending on the officer, the case will get referred to diversion. Even that takes some days. In a lot of cases, they're getting cited to court, and then the state's attorney's sending them back and telling them, send them to diversion. 2-3 months go by, and people just keep right on going. They're showing up again, and that's why you see, I mean, I think you know this from your work. That's why you see people with 15, 20 pending cases, because their due date in court is so far down the road that they just keep going. The way I would envision this going is when you process somebody for shoplifting, and again, you're not going to cover this 24/7, but again, the stores aren't open 24/7, that you would bring someone to that center for processing, and there'd be an immediate intervention by a staff from the outreach unit to intervene to see if this person is interested in getting to some services. So, and they immediately start getting processed as part of the diversion process. So there's some type of consequence starting to happen immediately after the behavior that landed them in the custody of the officer to be processed. Now, obviously, misdemeanor You know, they can't be held beyond the processing, and they have to be released potentially on a citation. But by having the citation ability to hang over their head, there's this concept of focused deterrence that talks about using levers. That's a lever to use against the individual. I also think it presents the opportunity, and I talked with Crystal Lee a little bit about this. There's a difference between deflection and diversion. Deflection is a total, those are like the Perry programs that police departments divert people completely away from the criminal justice system into treatment. But you've always got the lever to pull because of the crime they committed. But what happens now is these cases sit so long, it doesn't mean anything to anybody. So I hope that helps answer that question.
And actually, just to highlight that, I mean, when I did criminal defense work and had a public defender contract, I mean, the phrase that we used, and perhaps it's cynical, and I hope people don't judge me for it, but delay goes to the defense.
Yeah.
The longer you can delay a case, the better it is for the defense. Witnesses are going
Right.
to fade, memories are going to fade, anger is going to dissipate, all that stuff.
So what happens 12, 14, 16, 18 months down the road? 20 pending cases, they plead out the one and they get diversion.
Yeah, you get the,
They get a deferred sentence. The consequence does not impact the behavior of the individual.
You put a lot of emphasis on data collection and analysis, and looking at the flow chart. We're recommending 2 people to do that. And the fire department also has some problems with data analysis. Is this a job that could be across the spectrum of both police and fire?
I think it would be. I think it could be. Again, you know, I didn't talk about the fire department because the scope wasn't the fire department, you know, it wasn't the engagement. But you can't separate out your EMS arm of the fire department from the impact on the community. So I mean, I think it would have to be a conversation between 2 chiefs, but I don't know why you couldn't share someone to take a look at that data. Because if it was me, I'd be taking the fire department data and merging it into my police data anyway to get a better picture of what's happening at a given location.
Thank you.
so let me ask the board, we have another significant agenda item that we are rapidly approaching. There is no action step for us to consider tonight. But I'm wondering, I would like to hear, I'm assuming all of us would like to hear from other people who are in the room. But I don't know that we can do that tonight and not get out of here after midnight. So I'm wondering if it would make sense for us to schedule another significant, in terms of time, a significant encounter with this issue on another in another meeting agenda as soon as we can.
I think it's a great idea.
Is that, so because I think if people were hoping to contribute their thoughts tonight, I hope they are, because we'd like to hear what they have to say. But we have other things that are going to take a significant amount of time tonight as well. So if with the board's consensus, I think what I'd say is thank you for your presentation, and we'll not, we're just going to adjourn this and take it as soon as we can again.
And I'll certainly make myself available too.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jim.
Great.
It's a lot. So with that, I wonder if we can move on to the next agenda item, the Glaser Parcel Specific Plan Transmittal Overview, Part 1.
Yeah.
So,
Kick things off. Some of the folks in the hall.
Welcome.
always a pleasure.
Eric, I'm going to join the Zoom to share some slides.
Yeah, I'll make you a.
Expect quite so many people to be.
That's your account, right?
Planning zoning, yep.
I can kick things off if the board ready. Well,
Yeah.
set up here.
Yeah, Eric, why don't you go ahead?
So tonight, we're going to discuss a specific plan proposal. We have time blocked off for tonight and the 21st regarding a transmittal for the Glaser property residential subdivision. The specific plans and mechanism in the town's zoning that, if approved, results in amendments to both the zoning bylaw and the town's comprehensive plan. Tonight, we have our planning staff and the applicant to provide an overview of the proposal and the process that's occurred, I think, over the past year or so to arrive at this stage of the review to the select board for what's been transmitted to you by your planning commission. The action item for the select board at a future meeting will be like any zoning bylaw or comp plan amendment to consider warning a public hearing on the amendments. If this proceeds to a public hearing, after the public hearing is closed, then the select board can consider action to adopt the specific plan. That decision point is later in the process. Tonight and on the 21st, it's planned to be an overview of this proposal before you. We've worked to build this into a couple meetings, so there's certainly a lot to cover, starting with kind of laying the groundwork for the board of what is the specific plan. And, these are the board every maybe 4 or 5 years. We want to come to the board, maybe sometimes longer than that. So trying to kind of build that for the board to review to understand what it is, this process that you're going to review, and then what the application is for you. Then we'll certainly be looking for questions the board has tonight to follow up on the 21st. And then part of this proposal is looking at some land that the town may acquire as a substantial public benefit in this. We'll focus more on that on the 21st. But want to make sure that all the board's questions are answered because it's a complex planning and zoning process. The board would, decision point is whether you want to warn a public hearing after the staff transmittal and all questions. With that, I'll turn over to our planning staff. We're going to start with an introduction of what is a specific plan. We have Mr. Glaser here this evening who's going to speak to who submitted the application to speak to that. So why he pursued this pathway. It's a consultant team with him as well. And then our planning staff will really delve into the process, what the application and what the proposal is. So all the talking I'll probably do for a while. Turn it over to our great planning.
Thanks, Eric. And can you turn on screen share permissions?
So while we're getting the screen share going and hopefully without overlapping what Eric just described to you, I'm also here to speak briefly and then turn things over to our excellent planning staff. Emily really shepherded this entire process, drafted the memos that are in front of you tonight, and prepared all of the supporting documents that took us through this nearly 11-month public process involving neighbors, applicant, planning commission, Glaser specific plan advisory committee, and of course the other members of the Williston planning staff. Together, everybody has participated in this defined adopted process that's part of the Williston Unified Development Bylaw. And just taking a moment to thank everybody who did come out and participate, either as a citizen, an applicant, a committee member, or as part of our planning commissioner staff throughout that. It really strengthened the process for all of us and made that work go better. And just to tee it up and then roll into Emily's presentation, I want to just sort of emphasize that specific plan is an adopted part of the Williston Unified Development Bylaw. It's about considering a proposed development that will provide a substantial public benefit in exchange for some flexibility in zoning. And it exists for a good reason, because not every parcel of land in Williston or any place is the same. In fact, none of them are quite the same as one another. And there are many paths to achieve the goals of a comprehensive plan. Towns and municipalities everywhere do their best to try to capture that in their normal adopted regulatory scheme. but paths like specific plan in Williston, or if you've heard of planned unit development approvals in other communities, exist to acknowledge the fact that different pieces of land may have different opportunities to help a community achieve its goals. And zoning, just by its nature, cannot be one size fits all. And with that, I'm going to not talk for quite a while and let Emily roll into the presentation.
Cool, thanks, Matt. So I'm going to dive deeper into what the specific plan process looks like. An overview of the proposed town plan and bylaw amendments. No action is required on those tonight, but you have the option in the future to warn a public hearing. And I'll also give an overview of the proposed substantial benefit. As Eric discussed, we'll go over more details on the 21st. So roll in process. We are here with you guys, the select board. You are elected officials that adopt town plan and bylaw amendments. Town plan and bylaw amendments begin with the planning commission, and ultimately zoning bylaws are administered by the development review board as well as the zoning administrator. So the town plan plays an important role in a community. It's its guiding vision and goals. It informs a lot of different things, like what the bylaws say in terms of development standards and zoning districts. It also informs things like capital and operating budgets or other activities like scoping studies. And the development bylaws are administered by the DRB, by the zoning administrator, as well as through this unique specific plan process. So a specific plan is a set of amendments to a town's comprehensive plan and the bylaw that have been developed by a landowner working with the planning commission and the public at the landowner's expense. It must go through the same process required for the adoption of town plan and bylaws. This ensures that while it will, as all land uses do, serve private interests, it will also serve substantial public benefits. The specific plan process cannot begin without a finding made by the planning commission that a substantial public benefit could result. A specific plan is detailed performance standards, and if the proposed development doesn't move forward, the specific plan standards cannot be applied to a different development. So typically, a bylaw amendment is town-wide or zoning district-wide. In this case, it's only for one parcel and that one type of development proposed on that parcel. Specific plan can refine and add detail to the goals and objectives of the town plan, and it can refine the standards of the zoning bylaw or create a new district. And again, it can't begin with that finding of substantial benefit. So what is a substantial benefit? It's an action taken by the applicant at their expense that implements something in the town plan. And mere compliance is not a substantial benefit. It needs to be an action that is above and beyond what an applicant would be required to comply with the bylaw. Chapter 9 in the bylaw lists 5 options for substantial benefit: open space, affordable housing, infrastructure, town center, and jobs. Jobs is one that can only be used in combination with one of the others. In this specific instance, the applicant is proposing open space, conserving one or more open space assets identified in the town plan, or another asset that is acceptable to the conservation and planning commissions. In terms of the timeline, Chapter 9 spells out how the process works. An application is submitted. In this case, it was submitted last September. The Planning Commission initiates their review, and they make a tentative determination that a substantial benefit could be there. And then they decide to move it forward to community meeting. Community meeting is informal, but it is noticed. So abutting property owners get letters. We put an ad in the paper. We put up notice signs on the property. We went above and beyond by putting it in Front Porch Forum and our Planner's Corner newsletter to make sure that the information is publicly available. In this instance, the community meeting was held over 3 nights in November and December of last year. And following the community meeting, the Planning Commission again must decide, could a public benefit result here? And they said yes, and they moved forward to establishing an optional advisory committee. The Planning Commission is allowed to establish an advisory committee, and they set a deadline of 6 months. And the committee worked from January to May of 2023 with the applicant and his consultant and engineering team. We had a site visit in April, and the advisory committee presented the specific plan. So they presented those town plan and bylaw amendments back to the Planning Commission, and the Planning Commission decided will warn town plan and bylaw amendment hearings. Those happened in October, and here we are today at an informational session for the select board to decide if you want to adopt the town plan and bylaw amendments. I'm going to pause there and turn it back over to Eric, and then dive in deeper on what the benefits are and what the bylaw amendments are shortly.
So that kind of gives the board a, a starting point of what is a specific plan, and we thought at this point it might, like the applicant, Mr. Glaser, if he wants to say a few words about why he pursued this process to kick it off, and then staff can go into the nuts and bolts of the proposal.
Thanks, Emily and Matt and Eric, for talking a little bit about the what. I wanted to say a little bit about the why. So my wife and I purchased the property, the 97-acre property, in the early 2000s. We had adjacent land prior to that where we built our home. And around 2000, 2002, we learned that the property was being considered for a pretty large development. So my wife and I talked to the current landholders, the then current, the Ezermans, and we plunked down a large part of our savings to basically keep the land open. So 20 years later, I have a little less hair, and what hair I have is a lot grayer. And it's like we have to move on to the next phase of our lives. And my wife and I have given a lot of thought to what we wanted to do with this land, which we actually have really come to appreciate and love. And we also have really come to appreciate all the work that the Mosses do with Windswept Farm to keep the land open. And we conceived of an idea, and we brought it to the town, and we learned a little bit more about the specific plan. What we wanted to do was something, I'll call it responsible. We wanted to be responsible with the land. We realized that responsible, given the current housing shortage, wasn't to keep the land open, especially land that was in the residential district and the sewer district, which had all the town support. So yet at the same time, we didn't want to do a traditional development. We wanted to basically do something that we thought we would be proud of and would basically represent our values over the long term. And by long term, I don't mean 10 or 15 years. I was thinking hundreds of years out into the future. So what we started to do was think of ways that we could keep the land open, that we could do responsible development. We engaged in consultants. I actually met a very responsible builder, Tom Shepard, who understood what we wanted to accomplish. And we took that idea eventually to the Planning Commission. And in the process, as Emily said, we were very eager to work with the town and the representatives of the town. And through that process of these community meetings, I learned that what I thought was going to be really good for the town was not what everyone thought. And we came to a lot of, I think, really important compromises and made changes to what we originally were trying to do that would keep the land as much as possible open and available for the Windswept Farm to continue to use, and also to really preserve the view on Mountain View Road that is like this beautiful view that people drive by every day, but not a lot of people actually have been on the land and appreciate the beauty of Camel's Hump and some of the long vistas that we have there. So with that, I wanted to thank you for at least considering our plan. We think that we do have something that we can bring to the town that would be something that would really benefit the community, not just the current residents, but the long term. And I have to say, working with the staff has been also very informative. They've been very respectful about our wishes, our desires, and have really kind of directed us in a way that I think has been a much more fruitful way to plan what the land could be eventually with a very responsible development. So, thank you.
Thank
If you have any
Thank you.
questions, I'm happy to address.
Don't know are we ready with questions, or should we go on with the presentation? Let's have the presentation continue and.
Are you still on the Zoom?
Oh, I think it thought it stayed. It probably crashed. Pop back in. There we go. So as Jack mentioned, it was truly a collaborative process with the landowner, the advisory committee, town staff. And the proposal is a residential subdivision that includes an open space donation to the town. That open space donation is their proposed substantial benefit. And looking broadly, what does the town plan say about open space? And it says a lot of things. In Chapter 3, Land Use, this goal reflects the importance of protecting open space, from neighborhood parks to working farms. The town of Williston will continue to protect open space resources and provide outdoor recreation opportunities. Chapter 9, Recreation and Park Resources, says conservation areas are publicly owned open space landscapes that are used recreationally but primarily managed to conserve natural ecosystems. Community parks are public open spaces developed for intensive recreational uses, like playgrounds and ball courts. Chapter 13 also states that maintaining significant natural and cultural resources, including open space, is one of Williston's most important goals. And further in this chapter, it talks about scenic view sheds, where this view, the field southwest the intersection of Mountain View and Old Stage Road, is not protected from incompatible uses. Chapter 13 also goes on to talk about working landscapes, the protection of food, forests, and earth products, and outdoor recreation, including fee-based outdoor recreation, like the current user on the property, Windswept Farm, or other haying pasture uses on the land. Shifting from the town plan, the residential zoning district takes the goals of the town plan and implements them in development review. The residential zoning district includes Williston suburban neighborhoods. The goal is to encourage a compact, diverse, pedestrian-friendly pattern of residential development that also protects open space. And it has a density of 3 to 5 acre dwellings per acre. There is no quantitative minimum requirement for open space. Every site will be different. In the RZD, when you're designing a residential subdivision, you must protect watershed protection buffers, streams, and wetlands. You must protect slopes, and you must conserve rare and endangered species areas. Then things get a little squishier. You should protect, to the extent consistent with the landowner's rights, things like unique natural communities, habitat areas, which is like core forest and wildlife corridors, and less steep slopes between 15 and 29%. Then the development standards get even weaker and provide the weakest protections for view sheds. Scenic view sheds, partial protection of a view may be combined with development through good site planning. People should expect to have views that include residential neighborhoods in this district. And the mitigating measures that it references are typically developments where you're up on a hill and homes would otherwise be outlined by the sky and fitting them into a lower landscape. Lastly, the RZD states, protecting farmland is not a primary goal in the RZD. It is assumed that residential development is desirable in this zoning district. So in summary, what is open space? The town plan and bylaws don't specifically define it. There is no one-size-fits-all definition, and it largely depends on the characteristics of the land. It's broad-ranging from sensitive ecosystems where human activity is discouraged to highly developed or modified landscapes for sports and active recreation. And what is substantial? The Planning Commission Advisory Committee spent a lot of time with this word, and though Chapter 9 lays out a really good public process, it doesn't define the word substantial. But the Planning Commission and the Advisory Committee, the essence of their discussion center around their concepts that substantialness of the benefit should be proportional to the requested amendments, and the substantialness should be based on the nature and extent that it goes above and beyond the bylaw requirements. So what are the town plan and bylaw amendments being proposed that could go for a public hearing? In Chapter 13 of the town plan, we would amend it to refer to those fields as protected rather than unprotected, and also reference the other open space resources that are protected as well. There are 4 bylaw amendments. The first one is substantive in nature. We would amend the growth management chapter that this project would have to uphold a score of at least 50 points, and that they could receive no more than 18 permits per year for dwellings following construction. So this is slightly different than how growth management existed for a long time until your amendment last meeting on October 17th. Typically, a conventional project must score 30 points. And the Planning Commission felt that if we're going to create a unique phasing schedule for this one project, it shouldn't be a minimum project. It should go a little bit above and beyond. And they said, Planning Commission said, advisory committee work with the applicant to achieve a 50-point score. And then this limitation is on the number of administrative permits per year, which is a more discrete and understandable phasing schedule, whereas growth management happens before all of the permits are finalized. Administrative permit is that last step before you actually start digging in the ground. Chapter 26, street trees. We're just clarifying here that the exemption to exclude street trees applies here to protect the scenic vistas along Mountain View and Old Stage roads. Street trees will still be required along their new proposed streets. Chapter 39, we codify the existence of the specific plan, that it'll provide 53 plus or minus acres of open space, and it codifies how they will provide that by giving an irrevocable offer, a discretionary permit, as well as some minor things like floating trail easements. Lastly, Appendix K. So every document from your process, the Planning Commission's process, will all be neatly bundled in an appendix so that if the DRB has any questions when they are reviewing the discretionary permit, they have a complete record to look back on. Amendments that are not proposed. So Chapter 13, access. Initially, they requested to change the limit on number of units on a single point of access. So our bylaw says no more than 40 on a dead end. The fire department did not support that change, and the applicant, working with the advisory committee, revised their layout so they no longer needed to amend that chapter. They can comply as written. A specific plan cannot exempt a project from DRB review, local permits, filing deadlines, statutory requirements for noticing hearings and appeal deadlines, or fees. It's going to have to follow the same permitting process as any other development in town. And lastly, sewer allocation. Sewer allocation ordinance is a separate ordinance. Therefore, a specific plan cannot amend the sewer ordinance. They must purchase sewer allocation the same as every other new user in town. And that means that if allocation is sold out in a given fiscal year, they'll have to wait like everyone else to the next year to purchase allocation. Now the fun stuff. What open space is being provided? The first one is 15 acres of view shed that fronts along Mountain View Road as well as Old Stage Road. This is a photo of 2 of the advisory committee members and land consultant Ken during our site visit back in April. You can see Camel's Hump in the distance. So it's about 15 acres. The appraised value is 1.85 million. It is the distinct view that's mentioned in the town plan. There's no major wetland constraints. You can see in the map there's a couple little class 3 wetlands. Otherwise, it's highly developable. Currently, it is used as hayfield by Windswept Farm. And the Conservation Commission and Specific Plan Committee made some recommendations. In the short term, if the town were to acquire this, continue leasing it as hayfield. And long term, they felt that the view should not be solely accessible to people who are passing by on the road, but could be acceptable to provide modest park facilities. It's somewhat hard to see on your screen, but there is a small dashed line representing a building envelope. If the town were to own this land and pursue a park, that building envelope shows a possible location. Open space number 2 is pasture. This parcel in the middle is owned by Mike and Tina Moss of Windswept Farm, and the pasture surrounding their property is vital to the operations of Windswept Farm. Some of that land is suspected to be Class 2 wetland, so its development potential less so, which leads into an appraised value of $35,000 for the pasture and forest. It's currently used for pasture, and the open space and subdivision layout do accommodate the town's official map where there might be a desire for a path or trail, though wetlands might make that challenging. The Conservation Commission and Glaser Committee recommended that the highest and best use is continued pasture in support of agricultural working landscapes. So thinking back to the town plan, where some open space goals are farms and agriculture. Lastly, the other half of that 38-acre open space is forested and wetland. This was a view from our site visit when we took a hayride through the bumpy wet fields in April, looking westward to the forest, where the town plan, where the official map may desire a future trail connection or a path connection over to the existing path that dead ends near Coyote. A lot of that land is also expected to be wetland. It's not used by Windswept Farm, it's forest. And the Conservation and Glaser Specific Plan Committee both recommended to maintain this area as a forest. There is a section of delineated Class 2 wetland, which is open space, but it is not a substantial benefit. So that would remain in private ownership of the future homeowners association. And to quote Chapter 9, mere compliance is not a benefit. So when you're designing a residential subdivision, we say you got to put your Class 2 wetlands and buffers in open space. We don't want houses there, and we discourage road and utility crossings there as well. So it is open space, but it would not be desirable to the town as town land. Above and beyond. So mere compliance with the bylaw is not a substantial benefit. And the Planning Commission identified 2 ways in which it goes above and beyond. By donating land to the town where the bylaw incentivizes permanent protection. And that's usually accomplished by an easement or site plan designation on private property. And that's incentivized in the growth management criteria. Second, by conserving viewshed land that is minimally protected by the RZD open space development standards and otherwise developable. Thinking back to farmlands aren't protected here, and people should expect to have views of neighborhoods and viewsheds. Lastly, after the Planning Commission transmitted to you guys, I noticed a third way that specific plan goes above and beyond the bylaw. By conserving farmlands of local importance, by minimizing encroachment and clustering development, per Chapter 27, which is our Conservation Area Standards chapter. And that chapter is trumped by Chapter 39 that says farmlands are not protected in this state, but they are developable. So with that, I conclude my presentation about what the proposed substantial benefit is and what those town plan and bylaw amendments would be. Thank you.
Yeah, questions?
I just think that in any type of development, you have to properly define the land. I don't understand how it can be possible wetland, Class 2, when it might not be or it might be. Shouldn't that be properly classified? Because if it's properly classified as a wetland, then that takes away the third, specific plan. Open space, substantial benefit.
So if you go back, Emily, to that slide where you said planning staff found a third benefit.
Is that the one?
That was the last one there.
So
If it's wetland, it's wetland, it's wet, it's easily, it could be easily defined whether it's wetland or not.
So that bottom discussion doesn't refer to the potential wetlands on the site. It refers to the developable uplands on the site, which we have a chapter in our bylaw that says we want people to conserve farmlands by not developing on them. We have farmland here that's proposed to not be developed. But we also have a zoning chapter that covers this particular piece of land that says we don't expect to conserve farmland here. So this is about the upland at the corner of Mountain View Road and Old Stage Road. And what Emily's identifying in that statement is part of the bylaw wants to save farmland everywhere, but another part of the bylaw points to this zoning district and says we don't plan on trying to save farmland here. And we have a proposal that would maintain this land as farmland going forward. So there are other parts of land on this parcel that are potential wetland where nobody's proposing to do anything with it. And so, you know, the applicant delineated the wetland you see there in the middle of the parcel because it's near where they want to develop. They did not perform a formal delineation on the lands that are, you know, either forested or in use as pasture by Windswept Farm, because right now, neither the town nor the developer has a lot of interest in doing anything with it. If that makes sense.
A little bit. This was defined as wetland. What about the wetland buffer? Does this housing go into the, what would be determined as a wetland buffer area?
So there's wetland and buffer. Yeah, Emily's going to zoom in. You'll see a dashed line inside of the dark green and then the edge of the dark green. So that, sorry, the heavy line inside the green is the actual wetland edge and the dashed line is the buffer. So that's a 50-foot wetland buffer to the Class 2 wetland. So none of the dark green is understood as developable under Williston's bylaws.
And what about the other side of the road there, you know, proposed roadway? That's also got a buffer, I see in your picture there.
Yep, so there is a line all along that.
Yeah, it's,
Probably let the applicant talk about that a little bit, among other aspects of the site.
Could I try to address this question?
Yes.
For the record, Ken Beliveau, 683 Maple Street, Waterbury Center. I've been working with the applicant as a consultant for the last couple of years. So, Mike, to answer your question, we had a wetlands delineation done for the property. When an application for residential development goes through the DRB process, you have to do an assessment and a calculation for what is considered to be developable land, or what's sometimes referred to as a constraints analysis. As part of that constraints analysis, you need to map out steep slopes, which we don't have on this property, but also Class 2 wetlands and wetland buffers. So we did that. And the dark green area that Emily and Matt were just talking about there, we're very confident that that's a Class 2 wetland and a Class 2 wetland buffer, and it's been delineated as such. Now, the land that's in the more pale green area, which would be to the west and the southern parts of the property, we suspect that there may be some upland areas in there. It's questionable as to whether those upland areas are located in such a way or are large enough that you could actually do anything with. So we made a decision for the purposes of doing constraints analysis, because you have to subtract all that land from the base lot area before you calculate density. That's how the Williston bylaw works. So we just said, we're going to concede that this is all Class 2 wetland. There may be some upland portions in there, but we're not going to assume that they're there. We're just going to assume this is all Class 2 wetland and that there would be a Class 2 wetland buffer as required by the state along the perimeter of that. So it's a perhaps a more complicated answer than you wanted, but so as I mentioned, that dark green area, we're absolutely certain that's a Class 2 wetland. We're absolutely certain that that you can't do anything with it, and it will be protected as required. The area to the west and the south, there may be some upland areas in there, but we're not assuming that they're there. We're assuming it's all Class 2 wetland.
Okay, thank you. That, assuming it is, answers my question.
I think that was reflected too in the appraisal, where that 15 acres of view shed is 1.8 million, and then the remaining 38 acres was only at 35,000 because of that assumption about wetlands.
So the town gets the wetlands.
Well, some of the wetlands are abutting moss that are used as pasture land. And then some of that forest might have potential to, in the future, put a path or trail and connect over towards between Northridge and Martell.
But it's minimal benefit to the town.
Right.
Correct. That's your point. I think most people would concede that parcel is a minimal benefit. Not that it's not, I mean, it's gonna be open regardless of what happens because it's a wetland. It would be our wetlands instead of private wetlands.
Yeah, and I think that's how the advisory committee and conservation kind of sussed it out. Like viewshed is definitely number 1 here. Pasture is definitely number 2. Wetland and forest are kind of number 3.
Thank you.
But the 15.3 acres that abut Mountain View and Old Stage are not.
That's correct. That's correct.
You mentioned that 15 acres of the view shed you're considering, or in the plan right now, it's currently being used as hayfield as well. Is that what I understood? So the mosses will continue to hay that field?
So, the idea from the applicant perspective is we're offering the land to the town free and clear.
Right.
And then the town would be free to make whatever decisions you want to make about who would do what on that land. We see it as providing a potential mechanism for the continuation of Windswept Farm. They do hay that area that's there along Mountain View Road. If the town felt like that was a good thing, then you could continue to allow Windswept Farm to do that. That would also, of course, free the town up from having to pay somebody to hay it yourselves. Kind of self-maintaining. But that would be a decision ultimately up to the town. We're presenting it as it provides the potential for those things to continue, the operation of Windswept Farm, including the haying. But ultimately, once the land is dedicated to the town, then the town's in control of the land. And you would get to make that decision.
So then for Emily and Matt, I guess, in thinking longer term beyond, I mean, the Windswept will eventually pass to new ownership or potentially become something else. So, what would be, in place? So we're saying, this parcel would be pasture land for them. I'm not even going to worry about the hanging field because that's easy enough to deal with. What would be in place to, for future beyond when the moss is owned Windswept?
Right. The advisory committee and the planning commission thought about it of working landscapes. So the town could lease it to Windswept Farm. They could lease it to a different agricultural user in the future. The town could make another decision about maybe we just, hay it once a year or allow the wetland to restore. So the town could make that decision in the future. I encourage the advisory committee to think about it broadly in terms of working landscapes. And I think that structure in one of your transmittals from the planning commission is part 1 official and part 2 unofficial. And part 1, the official thing that's being looked at is town plan and bylaw amendments. But there's so much for the select board to consider about acquiring land and having a lease agreement. And they provided those recommendations and talked with Windswept Farm to give the select board, if this land does come to you, you're not starting with a blank slate. They've done some due diligence on what options would be the best.
The only other question at this point, I'm sure I'm going to have 8 million questions along the way, would be about, did the planning commission, did the Glaser committee, did they talk about equitable benefit to the town? Obviously, I can see that, how it fits in conserving open spaces and things like that, but equitable access to this land or equitable benefit to, the town as a whole. I'm not, was that part of the conversation?
Yes, it was, and I think it came about when talking through some of the growth management criteria and we were scoring the project. So the criteria do have a standard for provide neighborhood space, but it says, quote, need not be maintained by the town. So they do see a real benefit when something's owned by the town can make a decision for its entire citizenry versus an HOA owning private open space is managing it for their residents, and in some instances discourages or prohibits outside users. They felt that they wanted to think about the future use of the open space view shed, because right now that view is only accessible to those who are driving by. Maybe if it's town-owned land, there's a much better opportunity to create public access for people to enjoy the view rather than just private HOA residents or people passing by on the road. So it was a big consideration, and they were also thinking about equity in terms of how can this housing score, or how can this growth management score push it towards providing some affordable units, providing a diversity of housing types to meet the multifaceted town plan goals that are actuated through development review. Thank you.
Other questions?
So 15 acres, 3 to 5 houses per acre. So if the town decides not to go forward with this, it would mean possibly another 15 times 3 or 5 homes in that space.
Possibly. So the density analysis would allow 130 to 218 dwelling units on
Can
this
you explain
property.
that to me, how that number could be so different?
Yeah, so at 3 units per acre, and I'd have to look at the density calculation on the site plan.
It's 47 acres.
47, buildable area 43. So what Ken was talking about at calculating out those constraints, there's 43 acres of developable land. 43.6 times 3 is 130 units. 43.6 times 5 units per acre is 218. And that density bonus in our bylaw, there's requirement that 30% of those units be affordable. I will note that there are a pre-application has been submitted to the Development Review Board that includes this concept, as well as 2 other concepts that are 130 and 180 units. I think maxing it out at that 218 because of that wetland constraint in the middle makes it challenging.
Very inconvenient, but.
So if I could, what I would add is that at 3 dwelling units per acre times the developable land area that we have after doing the constraints analysis, you could get a dwelling unit yield of 130 dwelling units. The proposal is for 109. And while that's not part of the specific public benefit criteria that's in the bylaw, it is part of what's being offered as part of the proposal, is a willingness to concede the development to only 109 units versus 130 units. So for those people, and there were some people that were involved in the process that were concerned about how much development would be there and what its effects would be, this project would result in fewer dwelling units than you would get under a more maxed out DRB-driven process, in addition to the open space and the open space that would be given to town for town ownership.
If you did go with the 5 homes per acre for the higher density, would this affect the home price? Would there be more affordable homes being built in this development?
Yes, that 5 units per acre requires that 30% of the homes be affordable. Their proposal, that's part of the density bonus, their 50-point score was calculated on part on the growth management criteria that 10% of the homes be affordable. So they did provide the growth management affordability points, but not the density. They didn't achieve that density bonus because they're below the maximum density.
Essentially 13 versus 30 affordable homes. Approximately.
10% of 109.
Yeah, yeah.
Versus 30% of 218.
Right.
Is this going to be, is this part of the inclusionary zoning where they just pay the penalty, or do they are they required to build the affordable homes?
That's a great question. So the way that growth management statement is written, the DRB must make findings of 50 points based on the criteria as amended October 2022. So that's the older version of the bylaw. They could score points in the new categories that you just amended, so that new energy efficiency criteria. But the rules for this specific plan shall supersede all other rules of Chapter 11. So there's the inclusionary zoning track, there's the new growth management with pay in lieu, and then there'll be a statement in Chapter 11 says, Glaser specific plan, you're subject to this specific rule where you got to score 50 points and you only get administrative permits for 18 houses a year. And that's its own track separate from inclusionary or growth management. They still have to meet the growth management score. The Planning Commission didn't want to cede on the scoring incentives, but it would be separate.
It did strike me that when I was reading it, it's like, if I understand correctly, and I may not, but they could scrap. But by the way, thank you. I know you're a really good citizen. I know you love the town. I don't mean anything to say to disparage Glaser. I think they're putting their heart where they live, which is great. It did strike me though that they could add 5 more affordable housing and skip this whole thing and just go right through the inclusionary zone, right?
Theoretically, yes. And that pre-application that's going to the DRB next week proposes 3 concepts, the specific plan, and 2 other concepts. I didn't include it in the slides here, but when the Planning Commission went for the review, I had a train track analogy. So you can go down the conventional process, you can go down the specific plan process, you could go down whatever route you want. A landowner has a right to pursue multiple permits at once. They really don't start getting hemmed in until they finalize their permits and their subdivision plat or go to Act 250. That's when they really start to get hemmed in.
And if they went inclusionary, it wouldn't come to us, right? Because that's in our bylaws now.
Right, theoretically, they could go through the conventional review process right now and go the inclusionary zoning track, and there would be no offer of open space to the town. That would be a conventional project.
So on that note, if I could, all of this was unknown
Right.
back 2 years ago when this process started. Now, the application was submitted last fall, but the work started a whole calendar year before that. All of this was unknown. And in fact, that's only been passed, a couple of weeks. So it was never discussed at any point with, the discussions, whether it was with staff, with the Planning Commission, with the advisory committee, all of the, so we went through this process with that not even being an option that was on the table. So I would just sort of throw that one comment out.
You blame it on the town manager.
Well,
Well, I think that was somewhat intentional. This is a legislative process with the Planning Commission, but in a way they're putting on their development review board hats. And when the DRB looks at a project, they are looking solely at the development standards as they exist in that moment.
that's right.
And I think it was going to get too complicated with a citizen advisory committee to start playing through these multiple conceptual realities. So I said, okay, let's look at the criteria as they exist today and do the best that we can with them and give it a discrete phasing schedule that works for the town. And not try to create multiple options with whatever the zoning could be in the future.
No, I wasn't going down that we should have done that, or you should have, been able to crystal ball or something. It's just, it's interesting to me that putting all this time and energy, and I think you guys have all been like a lot of late nights on this. I've tried to keep up on Zoom watching the Planning Commission meetings, and I can't get through all of them. They're so long, but it struck me when I was reading it that 5 more affordable units, and it had all half your life back the last 2 years. So,
It is pretty wild that these 2 very long bureaucratic processes kind of converged like within weeks of each other. Then it's going to the DRB for something else next week. It's like quite interesting.
Something to keep in mind, which is that, you know, to not be too redundant, the proposed substantial public benefit is the dedication of this land to the town. For an applicant to just literally give the town roughly $2 million of land as part of a subdivision approval, I don't know that that's ever happened in Williston. If it did, it was a long time ago. But it's not the norm. And so that's something that the town has an opportunity to gain, which is the ownership of this land, which affords permanent protection. It's just something that doesn't happen. So in my view, it's a big deal. And I don't know that it should be minimized. That there might have been, you know, had we been able to look a little bit longer and deeper into the tea leaves and imagine what could or might have happened, you know, back in our crystal ball a couple of years ago. Could have been, you know, woulda, coulda, shoulda. But we looked at what was available at the time. And the plan as it's developed, as Jack has, you know, pointed out, it really fits with what he and his wife would like to do with the land. They've tried to be good stewards of the land for the last 20 years. And this presents an opportunity for the town to continue to obtain some benefits from the land that was what they really envisioned for the land all along. So I really see it as still a good opportunity for the town to get something it wouldn't ordinarily get.
And I also want to thank all of you for your patience in explaining this complex issue to us. There's going to be something there. I hope, you know, I've been following Green Mountain Power and what they're doing in Canton, Vermont with, you know, GMP announces a pioneering microgrid designed to keep the lights on with clean local power. I hope, you know, that, you know, Williston with this development can lead, not follow what we've been doing in Williston. Like, you know, I'd like to see this development be a leader in what, you know, we can do and see it, you know, spread. Sure.
I don't know if I have to go to the mic or not.
Yeah, you won't be heard.
No, I do. I really thank you for pointing that out, because that is what we want to do, my wife and I. We really do want to set this as an example of responsible development for future landholders, for, you know, for people who can look at not just the financial gain of a piece of land, but of the public benefit for the land. So our hope is that we can do that with the town. You know, yes, we could have gone the more traditional development route, and I could have had a lot more evenings. And, you know, frankly, I put a lot of time into this, but I'm pretty much at the end, just so you know. I really do think that this is worthwhile, but it's not my life's mission. So with that, you know, we are presenting this as an opportunity, as Ken said, that we think is a great opportunity for the town. And if you don't decide that you agree with us, that's fine. We'll go, you know, a traditional route. But again, I think that what we're trying to do is set the stage for a much longer term, higher community value. What the land's going to look like in 200 or 300 years, none of us can envision it. I mean, I deal with the future, like in research, and you cannot imagine no one can imagine what it will be like. It would be just a guess. But having the town become the stewards of the land will give the people who, like you in your seats 100 or 200 years from now, the ability to make the decision about what is the best use for that land as society, has evolved at that point, or devolved, but it can be the town can at least adapt to those times.
Thank you.
So there are other people here tonight. We don't have a lot of time left to go deep into this, but is anybody here wanting to say something? We are going to take this up again on the 21st. But seeing nobody jump up. Okay, great. So where do we go from here?
Yeah, so on the 21st, I was planning to go through a little bit more of conventional subdivision versus specific plan, in terms of what the development options would be here. The mechanics of the open space conveyance, future use of the town-owned land, whether that be agricultural, Winsett Farm kind of things, or view shed, as well as dive a little bit more into how the proposed subdivision evolved through the specific plan process, through the advisory committee, making sure it met all the standards of the bylaw and then got that 50-point growth management score. If there's anything else you want on that list, we're happy to add it.
Anybody want to add something that's not on the menu?
I don't know where this falls in, but my rough understanding is that this will be an additional 18 units, not displacing. There's 20, and I always get mixed up. These are real units or equivalents, but there's 20 available units in this area a year, and this will make it 38.
Yeah, that's a good way of thinking about it. Yep, the sewer service area outside the growth center. There's that 20 on that allocation table. There could be additional inclusionary units in that district, and there could be Glaser specific plan units. When I was analyzing this with the advisory committee, I looked at the utilization of allocation from 2016 to today. And for projects that, because projects had either built fewer units, didn't build at all, I called it proof of the poof. Some units just went poof because that allocation is a 10-year rolling cycle. So town-wide, enough units either fell off the table because they weren't allocated to anybody, or the project went poof. There are more unutilized allocations in that 80 DUE growth target than there are proposed in the Glaser specific plan. So when you look at the intent of that growth target is to average out the number of units in town over a 10-year rolling basis. And more have gone poof in the past than would be as part of the Glaser specific plan, in addition to what would happen in the future.
So that just might be something I'm still, like, with all the developments I know are coming into this part. The golf course being built out, and I think there's a couple, at least one more that it's hard for me to believe that those aren't going to chew up to 20 and then it's going to chew up to 18. So that might, I'm just putting that on the table if you could help me with what that looks like.
Yeah, definitely. I'll include that and that proof of the proof, and then those other projects that are going on in this part of town.
Yes,
Mhm,
that'd be
yep.
great.
Okay. Anything else from people real quick? Okay, thank you very much. Thank
you,
you,
guys.
everybody, for all of the work and I'd even say passion.
Yeah, very nice.
Something new tonight. Proof of proof.
Proof of the poop coming to you on November 21st.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for all your late nights too.
Next on the agenda, the vast agreement for the winter of 2023-2024, the Hillhawks. I'm noting just humorously again that the Hillhawks used to show up in person. And now the room is empty. But, you know, like we can't really hold that against them.
Actually, I learned that Shirley, our finance director, is
Yeah.
Bill Hawk.
Oh,
I saw that in the records.
She mentioned it last
she
year.
picked a bad night to be on vacation. I can't see this thing going anywhere.
Yeah.
Can you just make her come back?
Yeah.
We'll see what the board decides.
Okay. All right, Eric, go ahead.
Every year, this is a local snowmobile club. Town, the select board grants permission to use the public lands for trails across town-owned land each year. We have the Conservation Commission, Public Works look at this every year. We got the proposed agreement for the upcoming winter season and a memo from Simon, our conservation planner. There's one change in the prior year's agreement, was adding an insurance, a proof of insurance requirement. This has gone on for many years, no issues from staff, but recommendation for the board to authorize the manager to enter into the agreement for this winter season.
Any questions? There is a recommended motion.
Since I want to remain on Shirley's good
Good
side, I'm going to move to approve the use of public land by the Williston Hillhawks and the Vermont Association of Snow Travelers, and to authorize the town manager to sign the agreement for the 2023-2024 season.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there further discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
I,
All those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Next up, the appointment. So we have two candidates, one that we had last week and one that we heard today. Just open it up for discussion, what people are thinking.
I'm a tad torn because I thought, I'm thinking that Karen brings interesting, big picture, maybe new ideas to the post, but Michael seems a lot more connected to the Vermont size of these kind of discussions and things, and so I'm a little torn.
Other comments? Thoughts?
They seem to be both well qualified as far as planning issues go. Karen, when I asked her about, can you downsize your thinking a little bit from millions of people to sit in the county, she seemed to think that she could. And Michael is pretty new to town, but understands, I think, the aspects of the county anyway.
I like Michael's idea of connectivity of trails and sidewalks. Just one of the notes I took from Michael. They're both very well qualified.
One of the things I was most impressed by was that they're both really very, very recent transplants to our community, and that they already like really want to be involved, which I just think speaks so highly of our town. And I do think that, as you've all said, that they're both very qualified in bringing, a wealth of experience in different ways. I think I'm leaning towards Karen, simply because I think that, she had a vision, and I think that, she might bring some fresh eyes to some things that Michael certainly has a wealth of experience too. But again, I think it can be helpful to have somebody who's not in the thick of it all the time, bringing those eyes to something.
So we do have to have an official motion, but I'm wondering either we could have dueling motions, or I could ask people who they would vote for, and then we'll have a motion that way. Terry, you have more experience at this than I do. What do you recommend?
Well, we could have a straw vote as to which is our favorite candidate, and I have a motion after that.
Okay. Well, yeah, you know what? Let's do the straw vote. Then I'm just gonna start in that corner. Mike?
I gotta go with Mike.
It's tough, but I think Mike could hit the ground running, even though I am pretty excited about Karen's experience. I'm sure she'll continue to weigh in.
I would favor Karen at this point.
I would favor Karen as well.
Karen.
So the straw vote is Karen 3, Michael 2. So would somebody like to make a motion?
Sure. I'll move to appoint Karen Peterson as the alternate to the Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission for an unexpired 2-year term through June 30th, 2024.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Karen is appointed. Managers report.
I'll be brief. Our housing committee had its first meeting last week. They're getting organized as a committee. They're going to attend a roundtable lunch event by Champlain Housing Trust, and I'll join them with planning staff on Thursday at St. Mike's. Good opportunity to network with other housing committees at Champlain Housing Trust. Reminder, your retreat is coming up next, this coming Monday, the 13th, right here from 6 to 8. And I just planning with the facilitator today, and I'll be following with him tomorrow to outline, get the evening fleshed out for the board here. And you may recall you authorized Burlington Beer applying for the grant money. $850,000 grant, or rather the town has been awarded an $850,000 grant for the pre-treatment system. So the next step there, before we can consider the board can consider accepting the grant, we need to enter to a sub-grant agreement. Legal counsel has prepared a draft that we're going back on, and we'll likely have it to the board later this month, early next month, to review.
Does that amount represent the full amount that was applied for? I feel like it's less,
It's a
right?
little less. I think
Okay.
the application was maybe for 1.1 million, but of all the grants that were made, I think there was 8 or 10. So it was the highest amount that was awarded for this project from DEC.
Relative to the retreat, one of the things that came up in our meeting is we didn't mention whether there would be any kind of refreshments, food, dinner, or cupcake, or maybe a single potato chip. But I do think it would make sense for us to have something there. But what's the thought that people have about that?
Just because it's starting early? Is that what you mean?
Dessert?
Yeah. And it's, it is a retreat, so it's also, just kind of a less formal, maybe not exactly breaking bread, but something. along those lines. So, you said dessert?
Sure.
Okay.
Good idea.
Okay.
I mean, I'm not gonna turn down a cookie.
A gourmet cookie.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll find something locally in town.
All right.
So you can,
Other business?
Nothing I have.
No? Okay. Anybody else? Okay. Final thoughts on agenda items from this meeting? Are there any?
certainly the police report needs some more work.
Yeah.
Really interesting. Thank you for having that done. I think it is kind of a turning point with public safety in our town right about now. So I don't know what you have to give a little thought, I'm sure, you two, how you want to go about that, but not letting this sit for 15 years so they can say, and then the third report is it was also ignored.
I think we should try to get it back on the agenda as quickly as we can.
Yeah.
And for a significant amount of time. If we don't use all the time, then we can be ahead of schedule for a change. But yeah, I think it's, I personally want to keep the momentum going on this. I was very fascinated by a number of specifics and a number of concepts in it. I really thought it was meat on the bone of reform, and seemed very coordinated. But anyway, so yeah, that will I will do everything I can to get that on as quickly as we can. So,
Yeah, even if it's going to obviously take time to talk to staffing and new locations and all that, I was frustrated myself reading through the report about like, oh, we need all this policing, but there's not much criminal activity. It's like, how does that work? So the data, the missing data is going to be important if we're going to go back to the people in town and say we need, 6 or 8 more policemen.
right.
Yeah, but put a little initial thought into that. There might be an opportunity to engage graduate students from UVM, maybe another institution, to help us with some just initial data analysis, just to, even pilot having some personnel that's going to be tasked with that role to see how that might work. But just one initial thought in the short term to explore. And in terms of space, this previewed to me a couple months ago. We looked at a couple possible locations in Maple Tree Place. I'm waiting to get some pricing on it. I should have that in the next week or two, and that might be another potential consideration for some ARPA money. Maybe that seeds a lease for the first year for a space. There's also a grant opportunity. I'm chatting with folks from the hospital about to do a Healthy Communities grant where you can get up to $50,000 programmatically for a kind of health nexus-based project. Contacted and working with Burlington at CEDO. I think this might be a potential grant application too to help maybe just kind of launch things and decide how we're going to launch them as well. So I know those grants are due in the next month or two, so I should have some pricing and ideas just to conceptually to share with the board, just to think if that's something to pursue in the shorter term, at least start some of these conversations. You just received it tonight. So no, it's in the background. It might be something to
Yeah, somebody in their spare time, I mean, there's gotta be, as far as this data, it's gotta be it's not just analysis and data gathering, that's a systems thing, right? You don't want somebody like having to write a report and somebody type it in, it's gotta be like, this is what happened on my call.
Yeah.
And that's gotta exist, that kind of stuff. It might be super expensive because it's mostly bigger police forces that have that kind of stuff, but something's gotta be out there.
Yeah, the different records management systems where Valcor is the system that's used by most agencies in the state. Hard for the town to think about to collect that data when the systems look like.
One of the things too, the fire services analysis report had done, which I really found beneficial, was a breakdown of, recognizing that, like, I think, we onboarded 9 additional firefighters, but I think the ultimate recommendation was like 27 or something. I mean, it was a massive number, right? But it was helpful to break down, that to see, okay, well, we recognize that 27 is not feasible, but starting here with this pool. And so if there was some way to look at, with the police services analysis to say, okay, we recognize that, that onboarding, 11, sworn officers immediately is not, what's the most immediate priority number? And, of the other things that, we talked about too, like, as the community resources specialist or a social worker, like, what are the priorities in what order, how to do things timeline wise? Would that be possible?
Yeah, I asked Jim that when I was going through the draft report with him last week. I said, where would you start as soon as, say, next fiscal year, so budget's being considered? And his recommendation was to focus on getting someone in the BCI detective position from a uniform standpoint, and to look at creating that second lieutenant position, so that person would build out that wing of the community resources where it's being built from the top down, was his initial recommendation.
Okay.
And certainly thinking about that trajectory will be really important moving ahead cost-wise and how the funding's kind of.
I did read so you can look it up, just have it in your thought, but there was, I was reading that Rutland had a big town meeting about property crime, and some of their representatives were kicking around ideas that could happen at the state level to address some of the issues. So I just really keep an eye on that, because that would be an interesting, it does, when the problem is that it's not getting to the courts fast enough, having more police isn't going to help. Right, so it's just, working as a whole system as opposed to piecemealing a solution. We're not going to move fast enough to get in the way of that, I'm sure, but I just thought it was interesting. I think it was a bigger.
Yeah, I know Jim was at that meeting last Thursday, and we met with him Friday, so he was sharing a bit about, there was certainly some frustration.
Yeah, there was,
meeting.
sounded like it's quite a meeting. Let's not have one of those.
Does a more police presence deter crime at all? I mean, we can't arrest our way out of it if it's catch and release, but if we can somehow deter it. Maybe stores are gonna, box stores will get together and hire private security. I've heard that Hannaford's is hired with Chittenden County Sheriff's Department, someone to be by the door.
problem to solve.
You know, that's where, I mean, it's sad, that's what you've got to come to solve a problem.
Anything else? If not, I will declare us adjourned.